What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. This is Patriots for Truth. This is not financial advice, and none of this is facts. Obviously, we're all just trying to put the pieces together, connect the dots, and like some other channels have said about disclosure, it's already there. It's just for us to figure out, right? No agency is going to come out and tell us exactly. Right, it's too incriminating. So on this channel, we'll get into some secret military possibilities, secret space program. We'll get into some ancient monolithic structures and previous civilizations, but also some metaphysics and some finance. Whether that be portfolio, crypto, stocks, and some long and short-term investing, because here at Patriots for Truth, we believe that it's kind of all connected, and woke doesn't mean broke, So let me just give you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from, and where some of this information is derives, and a longtime listener of Project Camelot. Big shout out to Carrie Cassidy. She's been doing it a long time. She's definitely one of the pioneers of getting the information out. Huge fan of James Rink, who I've met. May he rest in peace. Journey to Truth. Those guys are awesome. Really like their approach to it all. Just polite and calm, and they get down to the meat of things. Same with James, and big fan of Gene Decode. I think his information is of utmost importance. Some of the dumb military stuff, and just he really goes in. Hard to deny some of the stuff, and hard to find elsewhere, really. But also Michael Salla, Dr. Michael Salla, he's been doing it a long time too. He's up there with Carrie Cassidy and Super Soldier Talk, and his information with JP, really good stuff. But then, just connecting the dots elsewhere, right? Like if anyone claims to tell you they have all the information, they're probably full of what. So I think together as a community, we kind of all lift up enough rocks and put together enough information that kind of exposes more of the chessboard, if you will. So I'm a big fan of Laura Eisenhower, James Bartley, good stuff. He's got great guests and he's a great host. All the stuff from coast to coast, over the years. Sure, they're kind of clipped, I think they're kind of like Gaia, right? Like they'll only tell you so much, and you got to kind of sift through it. There's nuggets, and then, anytime it gets like too heavy, they kind of like start it. George Norrie and Art, who I really like, but if the information gets like too heavy or too close, it seems like they kind of just quickly pivot and ask a question that's little distracting for the interviewer, or they change the subject quickly, is what I found over time. But they still do. There is still a lot of good nuggets there. But old school Art Bell, even non-human entities was great back in the day. Early David Wilcock and Corey Good, they had a lot of really good juicy stuff. Obviously, some of that stuff nowadays, listen to them is it seems a bit contrived and repetitive. But to each their own. Fade to Black was always a big fan. But if you guys know who Kent Dunn is, he was Pleiadian contact, and he had some really good information. I don't think he's been on the circuit for quite some time now, but back in the 2018 to 2020-ish, somewhere about there, I think is when he had some really good information, and he would say some stuff that was kind of like far out, and you'd be like, what the? And then you kind of connect the dots, and you're like, holy, wow, there would be like validity to it. So that was always a good, really, upon my journey, started listening to this stuff, getting into disclosure about 2012, 2013, starting with the Third Reich stuff and Die Glock, if I'm saying that right, the Flying Bell, and some of that Philadelphia experiment information. You kind of started there for me. But yeah, Kent Dunn had some really good information. It would kind of seem far out, and then the more you dig, you're like, whoa, this is. There would be little thread yarn of truth to what he was saying, and then it's like, wow, you just realize how deep it goes, with some of the trafficking stuff, and the elites, and the stuff that rhymes with the Google browser. That stuff Ken Dunn was getting out there before Diddy, before all this stuff was really popular. So big shout out to him on that. But also just some things that I have found to be true, which was interesting. Things like the creepypasta, the Dr. Creepin', and Mr. Creeps. Some of those are like just really good sci-fi-ish fantasy. You think it's just great storytelling. But I've come across about 5 or 6 episodes that were either military or just stuff that was, involving ghosts or different things like that. And like, wow, that's a great story. Let me, there was one that was a town that got like erased somewhere in the Midwest. Something had got released near a military base, and it was a fun story as far as storytelling goes, but morbid, and then I started to look into it. I'm like, hey, what if this was true? And so I came across several articles of it. I believe it actually was truth. So, with some of that Mr. Creepypasta, Dr. Creep, a lot of that stuff, I think, in my opinion, it's part of the disclosure. Like they're whatever is allowing that to be released, a portion of that is like the real deal. I came across several that I had released and that I had listened to, and then upon listening to it, just started to research the situation, the event that they were talking about, and I found enough clues in my opinion that it was real. So don't take that stuff too lightly, but. Another great guy that had a great testimony, and he's everyone kind of that's listened to it is like, wow, this is like powerful stuff. It's Johann Fritz. That was some really good stuff that he had those interviews with James and Randy Kramer, Emery Smith, and Jason Rice. All those guys had some really good stuff. The Jeff Mora podcast as well. There's just so many, that can kind of help all fill in the blanks with this stuff. So even Leak Project, I always was a big fan. He had some good stuff over the years, there's more to all of this, but that's all I got for now on where who I've been listening to over the years. But ultimately, we're victims of off-planet forces, and I think that's the podcast to discuss there will kind of help fill in that blank for all the non-believers, or for the people who kind of understand that there is more going on, but where to look. So that's why I give you some of that information there. But also, I think that there's a lot of connection to this planet having multiple, probably more than we would care to appreciate, multiple civilizations that have came and gone over the years, and that have reached a height of high technology, of intelligence, and they either get wiped out or they implode, or there's a catastrophic event. So I think it's really important to make that connection with ancient monoliths and previous civilizations. Almost like that show Fallout, where they had the previous intellects of the society before the cataclysmic event put their minds, put their spirit, put their intelligence, like a brain inside a little shell, like Crane from Ninja Turtles back in the day. I almost feel like that there was probably some truth to that. And in the show, it's been a while since I saw the earlier season, but the guy finds out he's talking to a brain in a capsule in the shell that's driving around in a little robotic, remote control car of sorts. So I would assume Egyptians and certain ancient groups figured out how they can transfer their consciousness, right? There's some podcasts out there that talk about the pharaohs of Egypt and the pharaohs of yesteryear. The pharaohs of then are the pharaohs of today. Does that connect to European elites or the ancient forces of back then are still kind of puppeteering, ventriloquy over epoch, over several hundreds of thousands of years, quite possibly, right? If you really dig deep into Egypt, they talk about the civilization being around for hundreds of thousands of years. Things like Thoth and Hermes, and they were creators that could incarnate into a new body, while keeping their consciousness and their memory. So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with in some of this stuff, right? That's how they can kind of bird's eye view control a planet, a civilization for so long and so effectively. So some people to get into on that would be Matthew LaCroix. Great stuff. Really good over the years, but somebody recently that I've been getting into, and I think he covers a lot of ground and brings a lot of plausibility, is Trevor Grassi. Really fun and good, great host, interviewer, and really good information. But over the years, Michael Tellinger, all the stuff that he's talked about in South of Africa, and having these stones that have a certain octave to them, and they're almost like a xylophone of these large rocks that when hit with a hammer, they ring to a certain tone, whether it's whatever type of musical scale the tone would be on, it's a G or whatever. I don't have the details on that, but there's plenty of videos that he shows that. But just the good Graham Hancock stuff, monolithic marbles, the Zohar ancient history, Greg Braden, really fun kind of stuff, and he's got some really interesting stuff on centripetal force and what the idea of time is and gravity. You'll have to look it up and watch his stuff, because he goes pretty deep, and it's he probably can't explain it anywhere near that it would be coherent. So the other thing that I've recently come across, and it's really good information and helps fill in a lot of blanks, is the Archivist. You got to check this out, because they're on that channel. They're saying that just 200-300 years ago there was an ice age. Just the 1600s were not what we think. Before that, it was, according to the Archivist, is that it was there was kind of tropical. Antarctica was unfrozen just as soon as 1600. Opposed to what we've been told through modern history, kind of this pop culture version of Rome, and the what do you call it? The Genghis Khan, that whole version of history that we're told. I think it's a lot different, really. I think Tartaria is very much, you just look at all across Europe and all across the Nordic Isles and Scotland, and just that whole area. Even a lot of stuff that's been hidden on in the U.S. continent, South America, but also Russia, China, the Far East, and in the Middle East, India, and even down through the South Pacific. You see a lot of ancient structures that they're large, they're way bigger than any type of modern human would have the ability to build or use. Frankly, just some of those doors are just so big you'd have to be 15, 20 feet, or anywhere in between to I think that the giants is very much a real possibility. And so you got to check out the archivists, because they talk about being able to clone people in the 1800s. They kind of wiped out the planet and then had like this repopulation, the orphan trains, and so it really changes the way we look at what we've been told. So I think there's a lot of truth to all of that, and I think it helps to understand some of that ancient civilizations, previous civilizations, and that they were getting into the soul, where we come from, and the pyramids, and how they align to Mars. And were they planet jumping? Did they understand that the pineal gland is a portal in itself, and we can kind of travel astrally? But then if with enough practice, enough focus on the centripetal force, we can take our spirit, our soul, and travel somewhere, but also with enough skill actually take our body there. That's with a portal or a stargate. But also I think the human is able to do that with enough advancement without a stargate, through the travel of the Merkaba. So it just seems like the pyramids are not tombs at all, and there's so much underneath them, and they were kind of these passageways to another celestial body, like the end of They Live. Shout out to John Carpenter, one of my favorite film directors, and a true auteur. So I think that all kind of connects to the metaphysics, and helps us kind of hone in to discover our soul quest, right? If we're spiritual creatures having a physical experience, then we're here for some reason, and I think it's a lot bigger than just this YOLO, you only live once type of idea. And that's how they being the powers that be, get us misaligned. And so Dan Winder's a great guy to get into for that. He covers a lot of good ground and heavy information, and its connection to Egypt and other previous civilizations. But I think part of it is they get us looking in the wrong way. So there's a guy that I came across recently, which is Tim Burkett. He talks about underwater bases, and there's things that are watching us. Did they come here? And if some of this is true, they've already been here. We're kind of this new experiment of the result of many cataclysmic events, and then they repopulate. So I think the surface of the planet is constantly changing and getting wiped out, and then they kind of start a new experiment of sorts. So it's even in old Star Trek issues, it's the Watchers are like behind the screen, and there's Watchers are watching and they're being watched, and kind of the idea of the nesting dolls. So I think that's there's a lot of plausibility to that. We're all somebody else's ant farm. The way we can keep a house pet, the way the elites can control us, and there's probably galactics that control them, and so on and so forth. If the idea of a tesseract cube is you can condense time and space, then like Thanos, he had a whole universe in his palm, and so it goes on and on with the nesting doll concept. I'm a good. I should say I'm a big fan of finance as well. Like, just because we're studying this stuff doesn't mean we have to be some crackpot and broke, and some great information, but hard to be taken seriously, right? Like, no, I think your Freemasons, and I think your high bloodline families, they study this esoteric stuff, and they've got money, and they understand that we are multidimensional creatures. I think things I came across, and I think it was like non-human entities way back when, that these galactic groups, the human soul is one of the, or at least the modern version is one of the most advanced, if not the most advanced technology in the universe. Even the way on Super Soldier Talk, he talks. James was many different episodes had talking about being fragmented and being able to take a piece of the soul and being able to fragment it and create altars and then combine it with other stuff. And so if that's possible, I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's probably so much to it, what the soul can be used for and be manipulated, and what it can eventually translate to. So I think getting the finances down and having a financial independence and literacy is super important to, especially because if you get in this information, a lot of times folks that study this stuff get attacked in a lot of different ways, TIs, and kind of surrounded by this gang stalking and stuff like that. So it's important to have the finances and get dialed in on that. So some people that I really like, I think, are on the right side of things and understand it really well and deliver it, is like guys like Ray Dalio and Jim Richards. A huge Rob Powell fan. Kitco News, Jake Claver, really big on XRP and just explaining how it's like the greatest wealth transfer. I think some of these guys, they don't really consider some of this esoteric and SSP stuff. So they say like the greatest wealth transfer of all time, but I think greatest wealth transfer of this epoch, right? What if some event has happened like this in previous, civilizations, ancient civilizations? There might have been something like this awakening event or this wealth transfer. So I just like to say the greatest wealth transfer of this epoch is how I look at it. But even a guy like Mark Kohler, who's more into the back end of things about working your taxes, right? He's really good stuff. Check him out. Someone that recently I really like his stuff. He's kind of cavalier and I love it, and just brilliant with the information and breaks it down in a lot of ways. Is Tom Luongo. I'm saying that right. Really fun and just kind of rough and dirty. He's really fun and awesome. But Black Swan Capitalist, those guys are awesome. Bigger Pockets for just investing in advice and real estate, and I was always a big fan of that show as well. But Danielle Camponi, she's right up there. And I think you want to study, have a portfolio, precious metals, long-term, short-term, IRA, taxes, real estate. You got to put all this together, and I think Rob Powell's right with his thesis. If you don't know his story, check him out. 30, 40-year guy from London Wall Street, Saks Fifth Avenue guy, comes from a prominent family, is transitioned 100% over to crypto, and was originally blackballed by his whole network. That said he was crazy, and now he's kind of leading the charge on some of that, and his "don't f this up" thesis. So he's one to really get into if you have any doubts or if you just need more alpha. And it's important because the information that I came across is that the Mag 7 and the Fortune 500 companies, they've been on blockchain since the early 2000s. you know, as a means to keep everything organized and structured. And if you understand the nature of the blockchain and how it connects, one wallet is time stamped and address stamped for the amount, and it's all kind of all locked in. I'm not saying there's not backdoors. I'm not saying it can't be manipulated, but it is a lot harder. We left book entry in the 70s and went to digital, and then I think somewhere in the early 2000s we left digital, and these big companies went to the blockchain. So there's movies like Sneakers and the movie Crypto with Kurt Russell. There's you got to watch them to make sense of it. But in Sneakers, they talk about XRP, and this is way back in the 90s. There's, go to an Instagram, look that up, XRP and Sneakers, the movie, and you'll see what they explain it really well. And then the movie Crypto, he talks about Bitcoin and all this being linked to money laundering and stuff, and it's like Russian mob stuff. And then the FBI saves it, and to be quite honest with you, I think it's a little backwards. It's a little other way around. Or I'm not saying there's not, mafia people from all different, from the Eastern continent and this and that, and they kind of single out the Russian mob in that movie. But I think it's a lot deeper than that, and I think it's, I think the Russian elite are kind of leading the charge in a lot of positive ways to stop three-letter agencies like the FBI and CIA from doing the things they do, the trafficking and the laundering. So in the end, you got to watch it, but they kind of, I think it's a little flipped on its head, just in that, how they make it seem like the FBI are these good guys and they're stopping the Russian mob, but I think it's a little backwards, if you ask me. But again, it's just the tip of the iceberg with some of that crypto stuff, and it's if we are being controlled and ultimately victims of these off-planet forces, they've been on blockchain and digital currencies for a long time. They're not handing out, paper dollars on the moon and on, Mars, and walking around with gold bullion and stuff. It's too cumbersome. It's too heavy, and paper's, fiat's kind of worthless, especially when backed by nothing, right? All that Roosevelt stuff, and they took us off the gold standard and the straw man, and that's a whole other ball of wax, and you got to go deep in that stuff and go down that rabbit hole to see that there's a so the whole straw man concept I think is true. So if we are being controlled by those off-planet forces, they're on digital currency and have been for a long time. So that's something to consider. But as above, so below. This is a spiritual war, and it takes the identity of politics and economics. And I think part of the way that the control is harnessed is through emotions and your attentions, right? Like transurfing your reality, pandeterminism. It's what you pay attention to is what becomes your reality. So a lot of this, politics and economics, and it's a form of slavery. It's a form of control, and I think that's how the powers that be sort of keep our backs against the wall in a lot of ways, right? Nothing worse than your slaves not understanding they're enslaved. No one's ever fought a war they didn't know they were in, and so you don't have to put a shackle on somebody that builds their own jail cell, right? So this new administration, Team Trump and everything he stands for, the Patriot movement. I think they're duking it out with the old oligarchs, the old powers that be, and they're gaining a lot of traction and getting a lot done. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes, like Gene Decode talks about. A lot of these underground bases have been either filled in, whether they flood it and then fill it in with concrete and stuff like that, or they just take it over or blow it up, or so there's a lot of change coming, and I think all the signs are there. So shout out to them for fighting the good fight, and we all got to play our part in this. But lately we've been hearing about this Europe and the EU, and how it links to the real control, and I think that's linked to Antarctica and some of these powers that be that are from a previous epoch that still kind of run things, and that's what we're dealing with. I think that's what Team Trump and the Patriots are up against, is these Homo carpensis, more advanced beings, a lot easier, a lot higher IQ. They're a lot older. They live a lot longer. It goes a lot bigger than just the Jews are controlling the world. It's like, no, it's. I think if you really dig deep, you see the kings and queens of the oligarchs of Europe kind of use the whole Jewish card as a that's kind of their scapegoat. Sure, there's Jewish bloodlines that I think are privy to this, and they're kind of above the line, if you will. But I think a lot of times they use that as the distraction, right? They throw the stone, you look over there, and then what's the really going on is on the other side, the backdoor concept. So I think these kings and queens really do translate to the dolichocephaly, I think is the word. Humans with larger skulls. They kind of orchestrate from behind the curtain, and I think a lot of that comes down to Antarctica and what's underground there. So the scarcity model is fake. It really is. You see some of these 10% control 90% of the world's wealth and assets, right? I think someone like Catherine Austin Fitts has talked about where, the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion is so gray, right? If we had 20 trillion, or whatever, I'm sure it's bigger than that. What it takes to build a dam is like a couple billion dollars, and there's so many of them. So it's like if we had all that kind of money released to the people, everyone could have a small amusement park in their backyard. Trillions, multi-trillion, double-digit $trillion is a lot more than I think people realize from what I've come to understand. Now, would that be good? Would you want to just give every 18-year-old $1 trillion, $1 million, and keys to the Ferrari? No, I think with money comes responsibility. So I'm not saying like, just eat the rich and give all the money to. I don't think that's the solution. I think there has to be some struggle, and there has to be some growth. That's how humans grow. I've heard of certain transmissions from like Barbara Marciniak, and came across where there are worlds that there's no struggle, right? There's no war, and there's no hard times, and eventually civilizations become complacent, and there's no spiritual growth. So we do need some struggle, but it's, I think, like many others have said, like you come to Earth because it's a hard place for the soul to exist. So I think there's a threshold to that, and it seems like the scales have been tipped, with all this trafficking on a global scale, and it's gotten out of hand. And I think some of that Andromedan Council stuff they talk about it ruining other timelines, and a lot of it derives from this period of time, and I feel some truth there's some truth to that. We need to sort of bring some balance to all of this, but if all this is true, there's other constellations and hoarding of resources. This is not the only planet, I'm sure, that works like this. I'm sure there's other planets that are worse off, and there's probably other utopian society planets as well. From if you're dealing with all these different galactic groups, and they've all reached a level of of advancement where they can space travel, and then it can, we're dealing with dimensions and timelines and reincarnation. It gets pretty heavy. I think in the Hermetic principles, they talk about understanding this stuff comes a lot of responsibility, because you can use this type of understanding and draw power from it and use it to manipulate, or you can use it to do good. So it's important that we have a certain integrity, a certain level of integrity. But ultimately, the money's fake. It's interdimensional beings don't really need currency, right? They could just mine an asteroid, or like what we're seeing now, they could just keep printing the money, especially if it's not on gold backed or anything, right? Construction, it just seems like your big general contractors, like, you think they take a loan to build up a skyscraper, but I don't think it works like that. Maybe on our smaller level, but when they have these grand projects, and like one big GC is got 10 huge builds going in every major city. You're right. That's how infrastructure is built. They'll have one GC will have like 10 different structures going up in a city, and there'll be 5-6 different contractors, GC, general contractors that have the same. I think they're being handed money by the WEF or the BIS, and they're saying like, hey, go build. I don't think it's a heads in beds, we got to try and get payment and pay back this loan. Sure, there's a portion of it that works like that, yes, but I think when you build infrastructure, and it's kind of these GCs are above the line, there's millions of subcontractors, but at the general contractor level that build it full skyscrapers, it gets a very tight circle. So I think when it get to those levels, they just, hey, go build. The currency is kind of, it's fake in a lot of ways. It's just how they get us distracted. On a soul and spiritual level, paper money wouldn't mean much, right? What's valuable at that is the soul would be valuable, DNA, maybe a celestial body, like owning a planet, real estate, right? Precious metals. And we know a lot of this dimensional and reincarnation and this what you pay attention to. We know a lot of that stuff is what creates reality. If you dig deep into the gateway process, check that out. It's CIA documents analyzing and assessing explains that remote viewing is real. You traveling, you're basically taking your conscious and viewing other things, traveling. I mean, the amount of money that they've put into research that is incredible, and they just wouldn't military don't spend money on stuff that doesn't promote further control. So yeah, check out the gateway process. I recommend everybody go down that rabbit hole and see. There's some really good books that talk about understanding that better and how to do it in your own life. Transurfing reality is a good one. But the dimensions, the multiverse, reincarnation. It's again what we're dealing with, this sort of this XY axis of time and space, and the soul and on a consciousness level, and then if you consider, Einstein and I think his name is Feynman. He was a metaphysicist from the 60s, 70s, and Einstein, and all those. The idea of physics and spooky action and superposition, and the same particle can be in multiple places at the same time, and once it's viewed, it knows it's being watched, it stops. So we know that there's this multiple particles that are identical, can be in multiple places, right? I think it sort of proves the multiverse theory, and I think there's many versions of ourselves. Kind of like the butterfly effect. it's there's layers. It's almost like a blanket, one on top of another and another and another. Back to that nesting doll concept. So it's pretty fascinating. All of this to me is it shouldn't. I really like the Journey of Truth guys, where it's not this like clenched fist, white knuckle. Oh, we gotta defeat and destroy, and we've been cheated. And I mean, there is a bit of that. People need to be held accountable, and if nothing changes, then how do things change, right? So there has to be consequences for our actions. I think that is important, but at the same time, we have to be fascinated by the biology of all of this. By the truth is way more fantastically possible and crazier than the fiction, and I think that's amazing, and that's something that we should be studying. All these different galactic groups, and we should be kind of fascinated by all of this, a little childlike wonder. But at the same time, we don't want to be, what do you call it? Taken for granted. We have to take this seriously, but at the same time, maintain a good temperament and appreciate all this too. So I think that's important. It's kind of like in martial arts. If you go into the gym and you're kind of bring this I'm ready to learn energy, but you got that dog in you too, where you show up and you put your all into your movements and into your forms and your training, but at the same time you're coachable and you're sort of happy-go-lucky. I think in Thailand they do that really well, where after every kind of session, it's hey, thank you. They thank the pad holder, they thank the person hitting the pads. It's thank you. I think that puts you in the best position to learn, rather than this like white knuckle angry state, and I think like Fedor Emelianenko, if people know who that is, like he was always calm. He was always like, wasn't a hothead. He didn't really let his temper get to him. Didn't over celebrate after a victory. But you saw when that bell rang, you didn't want to be the opponent. So I think that's kind of the science of how we should approach all this information. It's kind of like put your best foot forward, be a dog when you're in the midst of it all, but don't take yourself too seriously, take the information serious. So I think mystics and ancient civilizations had a much better and deeper involvement and understanding of all these type of concepts and how we're told and led to believe. Yeah, that's all I got for today. Honor, love, and respect is key, but we got to be tough, and we can't let ourselves get pushed around by this type of system and these controllers, right? We have to arm ourselves with information and kind of stay firm in our boots, but at the same time, be decent. It's tricky, a bit of a paradox, catch-22, if you will, and but I think that's the approach. So anyway, thank you, and may we all play our part.